Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, and there's a great day coming up for you here on DawgNation Daily. We're back on Facebook, back on YouTube. Eddie's got his blindfold ready to go. We've got a special guest welcoming back to the program we haven't had on the show in quite some time. Looking forward to telling you all about that. We're going to start the show also with some pretty fun stuff from Kirby Smart. A big difference in Smart this year compared to exactly 12 months ago in the spring of 2017. I'll tell you all about it, and I'll let you know why we're not the only ones around here who are Gator haters. It's all on the way next as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
If you want to start the show by going back in time to the spring of 2017, what Kirby Smart was like during his second spring practice as Georgia coach, there were really a couple of things that dominated those months leading up to G-Day in April of 2017. One was the quarterback, and obviously we talked here on DawgNation Daily a lot about Jacob Eason and Jake Fromm at the time. If you were with us back then, it was you'll remember that it was very similar to what we do now when it comes to the Jake Fromm, Justin Fields stuff, except we were doing that a year ago when it comes to the incumbent starter Jacob Eason and the hotshot freshman Jake Fromm. But the other story that seemed to get a lot of attention here on DawgNation Daily was dissatisfaction from Georgia coach Kirby Smart about the play of his defense. He really concerned about the fact that defense was just not doing what he wanted to see them do. Now, we know the backstory here. Smart's a defensive-minded coach. He had led great defenses at Alabama. Obviously, he wanted to instill that idea into Georgia after 8-5 in 2016. I'm sure that Kirby Smart was feeling like, okay, it's time to get this thing going here a little bit. It's time to show some improvement here. And, well, with almost every public comment about the defense, that was the indication that Smart gave you, including a real bold challenge to the defense to sort of step up and sort of shake off the cobwebs and just stop being so complacent. Here's Kirby from a year ago.
What I see is some guys that are kind of complacent and guys that are comfortable in their role, meaning I've started here for 2 years. I'm comfortable in my role. I am a leader on this team. I'm comfortable in my role, not challenging themselves to get better. You know, we go out and do a 2-minute, and the offense scores twice, and they score whether it's a field goal or a touchdown to win, and they score against a defense that every single guy that was on that field when they scored was playing last year with the exception of the star, the nickel. So I'm disappointed in that. And I don't think that there's enough sense of urgency for that defense, because as much as you guys want to say they're all talented and they're all this and that, until they actually prove it and they go out on the field and they dominate like the defense that should have 9 returning starters dominates, I'm not going to be happy with their performance, because I think that they should do that, and we haven't done that in 4 practices so far.
Not going to be happy because they weren't dominating practice. There was no sense of urgency. This is early going in the spring there, saying there's too much complacency. In fact, Kirby Smart went into pretty specific detail about just how much the offense was getting the better of the defense during these practices. Do you remember when Kirby Smart said this?
No, it's striking a blow. The offense is striking a blow, a violent blow, and knocking people back, which this game is a tough physical game. And we're not playing tough physical football right now, where they are. And I'm kind of like, well, they're hungrier than us, or our guys just aren't responding to the fact that we're challenging them.
Did you catch the we-they reference from Kirby Smart there? The we is the defense, the they is the offense. As has been pointed out before, old habits die hard for defensive-minded head coaches, and Kirby Smart, the defensive-minded head coach, was real concerned about the status of his defense there. And that's worth pointing out. Roquan Smith was injured, not practicing last spring. Trent Thompson was injured, not practicing last spring. So the defense didn't have its full complement of weapons, but Kirby Smart was worried about them. In fact, really, even at the end of the spring, Kirby Smart was still not quite sure what he had defensively, that the identity of this group had just not been established yet. Here's a little bit more from Kirby explaining that.
I've been around some really unique ones where there was great defenses coming back at Alabama, and maybe they underperformed for the spring, but they stepped up when they had to. Then there's other ones that have been really hungry, and then they didn't perform great early in the season because maybe they had butterflies and nerves. I don't know. This defense has not taken on its true identity yet.
So forget for a moment that the defense eventually established an identity. It was a pretty impressive identity, dominant for really every game in the 2017 season, getting Georgia to the SEC championship, into the college football playoff within an eyelash of winning the national championship. The defense eventually established an identity. It was a pretty good one. But what Kirby Smart was saying back then, a year ago in spring 2017, sort of led me to believe, well, if we heard that from Kirby last year, imagine what we're going to hear this spring, given the fact that there is no Davin Bellamy anymore. There is no Lorenzo Carter anymore. The Butkus Award-winning Roquan Smith is gone. And really, even other contributors to this defense, guys that had been doing big things for the Dogs, they're gone too. So if Kirby Smart was gnashing his teeth last spring, imagine what it's going to be like in this spring of 2018. In fact, a couple of Mondays ago on DawgNation Daily, I actually mentioned this point to Chip Towers, who obviously knows Georgia as well as anyone's covered them for a long time. And in response to me saying to Chip, I bet we hear Kirby Smart jump all over this defense in a big way, just like he did a year ago. I thought that Chip Towers had an interesting response to that idea. Here's what Chip said 2 Mondays ago.
I honestly believe that the defensive rebuild is going to be more significant than most people realize, and specifically in that front seven. And let me tell you, it's been interesting hearing the stories about Kirby, particularly at the DawgNation Appreciation event. And the funniest thing to me is that we all know Kirby, the frenetic, crazy guy on the sideline during the game. They said that's nothing compared to practice all week. Like, he's actually relatively calm to what he does. And I can't imagine what he's going to be like. There's so much work to get done on that defense. We may see him just lose hair on the spot while he's going through this spring practice, but just frothing at the mouth because there's so much work to get done on that side of the ball at all three levels.
All right, so for a moment here, as Larry Munson would say, get the picture. You had Kirby Smart spend all spring in 2017 ripping into a defense at every twist and turn, at every moment, that eventually turned out to be great. Chip Towers, who knows the situation in Athens as well as anyone, says, boy, can you imagine what Kirby Smart's going to be like in these practices this spring? He's going to be pulling his hair out. He's got so much work to do on this defense. There's so much to be done to get this group even back to the level that the defense was in 2017, if not take the next step as a program. So with all that as the backdrop, on Saturday, Kirby Smart did speak about how he thinks his defense is performing so far in 2018. Are you ready for him to rip into this group? Are you ready for them to have him say what it is and what needs to be done and how things need to get better? Give him hell, Kirby.
It was a little chippy out there, and guys were hitting, and I thought the defense actually first day today was better than first day last year. Because I know y'all still don't believe me, but last spring was, I don't know the right word, horrible maybe for the defense, because Roquan wasn't there and Trenton wasn't there, and we really got out-physicaled. But that wasn't that way today.
Now, hold on for a minute. What's going on here? Is Kirby Smart getting soft? Or is the defense truly in better shape here heading into 2018 than it was in 2017? Because I got to tell you, I'll have some fun with this and I'll sort of build up the theatrics. But the honest truth is, that is not what I expected Kirby Smart to say. And I meant what I said to Chip when I said that a couple of weeks ago, and I've referenced this actually a few times even on DawgNation Daily leading up to this. Though you better buckle your seatbelt here for Kirby Smart just hammering this defense. We're not going to know how good they truly are because Kirby Smart's not going to say anything. He's going to use every public opportunity he can to challenge them. And yet when he had that opportunity on Saturday to sort of speak about the defense and issue the same kind of challenge this year, no identity, not playing tough enough, too much complacency, too little urgency, he really didn't do that. He said things are better now than they were a year ago. Now, it's also fair to point out that he did mention there was still a long way to go, and because of how big and physical the offensive line is and how many mature young men you have playing in those spots, there is a chance that maybe you see this group start to get pushed around a little bit before the spring is over, but at least in the early going, that's not exactly what's going on. So, I think that Georgia fans should take this with a grain of salt, much like they took last year with a grain of salt. I don't know that very many viewers or listeners to this program were all that worried about the defense last season, even when Kirby Smart was telling you all the reasons why you should be. I think most Georgia fans thought, well, Roquan Smith is eventually going to be back, and even if we didn't know that he was going to be a Butkus Award winner, we knew that he was a very solid linebacker, just based on the way that he'd played in 2016. The same with Trent Thompson as well. I think most Georgia fans were fine with the Georgia defense, even when Kirby Smart was sort of acting like publicly that he was not. Same thing's probably true here. A little bit of a public praise there for the Georgia defense. Is the situation by the end of the spring going to overall be as good as it suggests, at least by the early preview preview of what Kirby Smart has to say there? Maybe not. I'm sure there'll be some turns along the way where Kirby Smart asks for more from this group, and obviously I don't want to in any way downplay the significance of having to replace, as Chip Towers said, what may have been the best linebacking core in the country for last season. Guys like Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy and Roquan Smith. That's a tough challenge. But my guess is that Georgia's going to be equal to that challenge, because I don't believe that Kirby Smart has gone soft. I don't believe his standard for 2018 is any lower now than it was in 2017. It just sounds like moving into his third year in the program, he's got a defense that understands those expectations a little bit better and may do a better job of meeting them than they were capable of a season ago. It all adds up, I think, as good news for Georgia fans of a defense that, despite losing some big-time stars, should be plenty of effective this upcoming season. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us on the program today. We are glad you're with us. No matter how you access the show, you watch us on video at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page. We certainly appreciate that. You can also watch us on the YouTube page as well. We are also airing live there at 10 a.m. each and every day. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available in podcast form pretty much wherever podcasts are found. Apple Podcasts, the Android devices. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really glad you have found DawgNation Daily. And I will remind you the DawgNation Daily today is brought to you in part by our friends at Kroger, who've got 11 days of incredible seafood savings. It goes on now all the way through March 31st. So dive in there and get some fantastic seafood savings. I'm talking about a lot of things like right now, like wild-caught snow crab clusters. You can get those for $7.99. Let me try that one more time. You can get those wild-caught snow crab clusters for $7.99 a pound. You can get lobster tail, 2 for $12 when you use the card. Extra large Simple Truth shrimp, that's $8.99 a pound also when you use the card. Alaskan crab, king crab legs, $24.99 a pound when you use the card. There's a lot of those great seafood deals going on. Seafood savings continue at Kroger now through March 31st, so make sure you check that out. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll also welcome in a special guest here today to DawgNation Daily. First time in a while for us to say hello to Bill Bender, who covers college football as the national college football writer for the Sporting News. Bill, good enough to be on DawgNation Daily here today. We'll get his thoughts on Georgia and his thoughts on the rest of the SEC. Bill's actually had some pretty interesting things to write as of late about how the Georgia spring game compares to some of the other ones taking place around college football. So that's going to be fun with Bill Bender here coming up in just a moment on DawgNation Daily. Before we do that, one of our buddies on Twitter, Bryce Dixon, who's a great Georgia fan, is always putting a lot of stuff out there on social media about the Dogs, tweeted something at me, and I thought this was pretty hilarious. I'm not a regular watcher of reality TV, don't watch American Idol, but I guess American Idol is being rebooted. Is on ABC now. Is that where American Idol is? I believe American Idol is being rebooted on ABC, and apparently I guess Luke Bryan, the country singer, big Georgia fan, is one of the judges, along with like Katy Perry, and I'm not even really sure who else, but one of the folks trying out for American Idol is apparently a Florida Gator fan, and Bryan, the Georgia fan, treated the Gator fan exactly how Gator haters would hope a big-time Georgia fan would do if he was on national television. This is hilarious from Luke Bryan. Take a listen to this.
You wouldn't happen to be a Gator fan, would you? I would. Go Dogs!
I'm so sorry.
Is that a primal mating?
So it got cut off at the end. That's Katy Perry saying, is that some sort of like primal scream there in terms of the Go Dog Sick 'em? I guess Katy Perry's not familiar with that, despite the fact that at one point in time she had hosted a college game day from Ole Miss, so she's at least got a little taste of SEC football, but not familiar with the Gator hater. Luke Bryan, I got to tell you, I'm going to give him some credit for that. It's a pretty good job given the Call the Dogs chant to the Florida fan there on the TV show. I thought that was pretty funny, so a good job there by Luke Bryan. And you know what? Around here on DawgNation Daily, we're big-time Gator haters. Our buddy Eddie likes that, and we all like that here, too. And don't forget, we'll do the Gator Hater Countdown later on in the program today. By the way, speaking of the Gators, Jeff Sintel also put something out funny on Twitter yesterday. There was this little clip that Georgia had shown of some of its spring practice, and you see a great hit leveled here by Marc Webb. We've talked a lot about Webb on DawgNation Daily, the transition he's made from wide receiver to defensive back. We think he has a chance to be a pretty good player on that side of the ball. So that little clip, I guess you call it a GIF from Georgia, got Jeff Sintel talking on Twitter, and he put out something that got the attention of some Georgia fans. Let me show you the tweet here from Jeff Sintel, who says, when a, quote, Gator in the UGA secondary is a very promising thing, Mark Gator Webb Jr. was ready for spring ball, referencing his Gator nickname. And then a couple people responded to Jeff on Twitter, including Scott Barman, who says the idea of Webb being called Gator might be a difficult thing for a DawgNation Daily to handle. And Ryan Green also says that if he's going to play well, I'm going to call him whatever whatever he wants. But yeah, the Gator hater himself, I think he'd probably say the same thing. And you know what? I do say the same thing. I don't like Gators, but I can live with Marc Webb being called Gator. I can live with that being a nickname for him because I don't know. In a way, it's almost like a badge of honor that, there's a lot of Gators down in Gainesville, but Georgia's got the Gator that can actually play and actually perform in the secondary. So I think a lot of Georgia fans are going to feel pretty good about that. And I feel pretty good about the way that Marc Webb's getting acclimated to that secondary over there, at least based on what we're hearing from other people. It seems like he's comfortable and fitting in and doing a pretty good job there. So that's all really good stuff from Marc Webb. Great video clip from UGA too, and they've done a good job on social media so far this spring of kind of giving you those little clips, those little tastes of kind of everything going on with spring football. Even the funny thing there with Marc Webb was also pretty cool also. So good job, Luke Bryan. Good job, Marc Webb, and Gator haters everywhere unite in enjoyment of that one. All right, let's take now a little trip around the world of the SEC and look at how Georgia fits into the mix here for 2018. Bill Bender's always a good friend of us here on DawgNation Daily. He's the national college football writer from the Sporting News, and we'll get ready to say hello to him right now. And as we said, he is national college football writer for the Sporting News, a terrific guest here on DawgNation Daily, a guy that really has his finger on the pulse of kind of everything happening in the Southeastern Conference, Georgia in particular. It's been a while since we've had him on the show. It's good to have him back. It is Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Bill, thanks for your time today. How are you doing?
Well, it seems like forever since I saw you at the national championship game. It's good to be back talking college football. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, it is indeed. It is good to have you back on the program. It was good to see you there in Atlanta back in January. And I guess let me start our conversation with kind of where we left off in January, the last time we saw Georgia losing to Alabama, but still in pretty good shape, most people would say, for 2018. When you kind of put your predictive glasses on here for a moment, how do you see things changing for Georgia in 2018? How do you see the evolution here for a program that kind of broke through in Kirby Smart's second year? What's the outlook for the Dogs in your mind?
I think the prevailing thought is ahead of schedule, and then you compound that with just an unbelievable five-star studded recruiting class, with the key being keeping all of that talent in the state. And then I look at Jake Fromm, and I know you guys don't want to look back at the game too much, but a guy that really asserted himself in that playoff run as not just Georgia's quarterback, but a potential, Heisman Trophy caliber type leader for a team that's going to be loaded again. So I would still say ahead of schedule would be the best three-word description I would have of Georgia.
Yeah, and you mentioned the way that Fromm plays, not just in the national championship game, but really in the season overall. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of folks think, even though that Justin Fields, the incoming freshman quarterback, is going to get a lot of attention, and he's certainly a great prospect and will eventually probably have a great career, I think there is certainly a large pocket of Georgia fans, I would suggest the majority of Georgia fans, who say that Fromm is still going to be just too tough to beat out because of what he proved as a freshman quarterback a season ago, doing things that are frankly not that easy for an 18-year-old young man to actually be able to do.
Well, I go back to I don't have the exact yardage in front of me, so forgive me. It was like an 80-yard touchdown pass in the championship game, and I thought at that point, game over. That's the throw that's going to define this game. Now, what's the dynamic at Georgia, obviously, with Fields? I know he has created a lot of excitement. Recruiting cycles, our analysts talk about him constantly. And it'll be interesting if they find ways to get him on the field. But if you look at this Georgia model, it's not exactly the same as Alabama, but the similarities are there. I mean, the good quarterback, the stable of running backs. I mean, I don't know where to begin with that. Georgia just has a ton of running backs, and then, start to build depth on the defensive line. I think if there's one concern for Georgia, and you guys have probably talked about this, and Kirby probably has too, is how do you replace that invaluable leadership that you had from Roquan, Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, those guys that really helped elevate the program?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Bill. I think that when you look at that kind of stuff, it's going to be something that you're certainly paying close attention to with Georgia this upcoming season. I will admit I was a little bit surprised, and obviously list these time of year, the kind of things that we use to sort of entertain ourselves and have a good time with, that the Georgia spring game did not rank a little higher on your list of sort of most anticipated spring games here for this upcoming season. You had Georgia in your top 10. You had Alabama at number 1. I would have thought the presence of Fields there in that game might have caused G-Day to rank a little higher on your list. What is your thoughts about what we might see from Georgia here in a couple of weeks during the spring game?
Well, that's a fair point, but it goes back to a little bit what we just talked about. I think Fromm's going to start. If there was a true quarterback battle here. Now, I know last year Fromm kind of raise some eyebrows because he pushed Eason at the spring game. So I guess that'd be the one thing I'd look for when watching the game. But I think, and I also made that list before Tua suffered his injury at Alabama, which kind of dampers that spring game a little bit. But I think with spring games, the ones that interest me the most are, and it's such a cheap answer, and I apologize, but first-year coaches like Scott Frost and Jimbo Fisher and especially Chip Kelly out at UCLA. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for them to take the next step.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be kind of an interesting thing to watch. I mean, Kelly's name certainly came up when you looked at some of the Tennessee stuff, and at one point in time was kind of in the mix for the Florida job a little bit. I think there's going to definitely be some attention that gets paid to what's going on out there. And you mentioned the Tua Tagovailoa injury. It sounds like you're legitimately, I think, curious about what happens to the Alabama quarterback job. I'll admit I'm the same way. I think it actually probably, Bill, works out pretty well for Alabama to have Tua miss a little bit of time in practice. I think it gives you a little chance to focus on Jalen Hurts a little bit more, make him feel comfortable about maybe hanging around Tuscaloosa and not looking to transfer, and then you can ultimately sort of punt on the decision of does Tua or Hurts get the primary snaps once the actual season begins. In a weird way, the somewhat minor injury that Tua suffered probably actually helps Alabama a little bit in terms of how it manages its roster this spring. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I go back to the title game one more time. I just remember sitting in the Atlanta airport about 6:30 in the morning. I didn't sleep that night, and it just dawned on me what I just watched, and that Tua is going to be this kind of rock star type talent, and he really showed that in that game for a half. And I think he'll end up starting. That's my gut feel on that. Of course, Nick Saban's not going to tell us that, and they'll find a way to get Jalen on the field as well. But I just see this dynamic within the SEC right now where it's hard to see anybody but Georgia win in the East and anybody but Alabama win in the West. And I know we're in the last few days of March here, and one of the big reasons why is Auburn, who beat both of those teams last year, has to go to both places. And I think that's one big thing. But, I just see a collision course of what we saw at the end of last year probably happening in Atlanta again next year. And that's not a bit, that's not going to shock any of your listeners, but it's just the way I kind of see it.
And you also, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you write at some point in time in one of your prediction columns that you think there's a chance that both Georgia and Alabama also both get back to the college football playoff in 2018? Am I putting words in your mouth, or did you write something to that effect at one point here over the last few weeks?
Well, I'll tell you this, and this might be a little more of an edgy prediction. I think that the list of true national championship contenders for next season you can find on one hand. And I say that because I think it's those two schools. I think it's Clemson. I think it's Ohio State. And I'd give you one for a wild card type team of your choosing, like if you want to put Penn State, Michigan, somebody like that, even Texas. And I guess that would be real edgy. But I think college football has a parity problem that those 4 or 5 schools, and Oklahoma would be another one, it's really top-heavy right now, and it's top-heavy in the playoff era, which is kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and what I think's happening there, Ohio State obviously lost 2 games a season ago, but you got Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, a couple other teams that are essentially hoarding almost all the 4- and 5-star talent. Now, they're not the only ones getting those 4- and 5-star players, but as sort of a significant percentage of the roster, it's really, as you said, a small handful, less than 10 almost for sure, that are able to say a majority of our players kind of come from that sort of, blue chip 4- and 5-star stock. And, ultimately, you may have, somebody put a dream season together every now and then, but in terms of actually hoisting the trophy, it's really hard to wrest that thing away from the programs who are actually recruiting at the highest level possible. And as you said, that's like a Clemson, that's an Alabama, that's an Ohio State. Right now, that's a Georgia. You can probably include USC in that group. And really, after that, the drop off from at least a recruiting talent perspective is pretty significant.
Yeah, it is. And the difference between the SEC and the Big Ten. So Georgia and Alabama are the 5-star studded schools right now, and they're in different divisions. The problem in the Big Ten is and I hate to talk down about Wisconsin. Wisconsin's not a 5 school that relies on 5 stars, though. So the 3 schools that really, grab the headlines, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and I would even wrote Michigan State in there, they're all in the same division. And I think that's one problem with the Big Ten. It's almost too good for its own good in some ways, and Ohio State found that out last year. So, but again, if I'm picking a playoff field right now, I would probably look at, a situation where Alabama and Georgia could both be 11-1 or undefeated when they play. I don't see anybody but Clemson winning the ACC. And then you start to look at Ohio State, Oklahoma, and man, I've gotten this far and haven't even talked about the Pac-12.
Yeah, it's really something. And, you talk about, Georgia's path to get to an SEC championship with Alabama and maybe get back to college football playoff. I think one of the things that helps Georgia is it is legitimately a pretty manageable schedule. Now, as you said, it includes a home game against Auburn. Bill, I still think Auburn's going to be pretty good. I think on paper that's Georgia's most significant challenge. But, kind of a two-part question, I guess. Would you agree with me that the rest of the schedule is incredibly manageable for Georgia at the moment? There is no Alabama in the regular season. There's no big non-conference game the way there was, last year with Notre Dame. I still think Auburn's a pretty tough challenge, but that's about the most significant of the real challenges that Georgia's sort of slated to face right now.
Sure, and I think, it's just because there's a I don't know factor with Florida and Tennessee, because of the new coaches, and you wonder how that's going to shake out. If I had to guess, I think Florida will get off and running slightly earlier than Tennessee with Mullen because he's good with quarterbacks. Probably it's not a stretch to say that the biggest challenge in the division might come from South Carolina, a team that's going to have an experienced quarterback, Will Muschamp. Big win for them in the bowl game to rally and come back and beat Michigan from a confidence standpoint. I bet you that's where Georgia's biggest challenge within the division comes next year if South Carolina's more consistent.
Yeah, I wanted to actually finish with that point because, something that you wrote, which I thought was really interesting. By the way, you can check out Bill Bender on the Sporting News. It's at BillBender92 on Twitter. You can check him out on the Sporting News, the National College Football Writer. And you kind of talked about how that you think at the end of the season, the Clemson-South Carolina game this year is going to really matter, which would obviously suggest that South Carolina is going to be pretty good. I happen to agree with you on that. I think that South Carolina is Georgia's biggest challenge in the East. And I guess what it comes down to, Bill, is that it's sort of an answer by default because the rest of the East isn't very good, or is this one of those things in which Muschamp takes another big stride forward? He's got Bentley at quarterback. The defense expects to get better because Muschamp's a defensive-minded guy. Change over the offensive coaching staff. Is there another legitimate team in the SEC East? There have been years when there was really no team in the SEC East, that was a sort of top 25 caliber team, and last year maybe it was Georgia and really, almost nobody else worthy of that conversation. Does South Carolina kind of join Georgia in somewhat of a national conversation this year? That may be one of the most interesting things about the Gamecocks.
Yeah, and I learned from my time living down there on the border in Charlotte that of North Carolina and South Carolina just how hot Clemson, South Carolina can be when both teams are right. And I think that's more of that was angled more towards Clemson, that they're actually going to get a challenge from them next year. Because I think that's Clemson's toughest game is probably at South Carolina. Then they play at Texas A&M as well. But again, I think it might take Jimbo a little bit of time to get things in order. So yeah, I think South Carolina has an opportunity. I would still, if I'm a Georgia fan, you can never take the Florida game for granted. I think we can agree on that. I think even Florida will probably be in a decent place when they play Georgia, and we know how the rivalries go. But like you said, there is no reason why, looking at the schedule, that Georgia can't just keep it going. And Kirby Smart, I'll say this about last year, and I think he'll do it again this year. He's really good at managing those expectations, embracing them, not running from them, but not downplaying them. I think he's really good at that.
Well, Bill, it's always great to have you on DawgNation Daily. Really good insight into the upcoming season. We can't wait to see how it all plays out. We'll look forward to reading a bunch more from you on the Sporting News in the days ahead. That's a great publication covering college football, and obviously we'll talk to you on DawgNation Daily again very soon, too.
Hey, sounds good. Thanks so much for having me on.
Good stuff there from Bill Bender from the Sporting News here on DawgNation Daily. And I'm looking at our Facebook comment section here for a moment, and I mentioned Auburn being the most significant challenge that Georgia faces this upcoming season. A couple people, or at least one person, remarked, hey, hold on a second, BA. That trip to LSU is actually the more difficult game in comparison to Auburn. And I think it's kind of an interesting comparison. I understand where the commenter's coming from on that. On the one hand, we think of road games as being tougher than home games. I do think, though, if you look at just sort of the side-by-side comparison between Auburn and LSU, I think that Auburn's going to be a better team. We do SEC Country Live in the afternoon on the SEC Country Facebook and YouTube pages, and I kind of find myself in a position once again that I frankly feel a little bit uncomfortable in. I'm, a Georgia guy. I don't like, sticking up for Auburn and praising Auburn, but I do find it amazing that almost very similar to a year ago when there was this sort of easy, quick disregard for Auburn before the season began. was going on during the spring, was going on during the summer. Oh, don't worry about Auburn; they're not going to be any good. And I felt like the numbers underneath that suggested probably a better season for Auburn and a tougher challenge for a team like UGA. Now, as it all works out well for Georgia in the end, they beat Auburn in the SEC championship game, but Auburn was good enough to get to that game last December. That's the point worth bringing up here. I think the same thing's kind of true again here for 2018. Auburn probably not quite as good as it was a season ago, and it's got road games against Georgia, road games against Alabama, as Bill Bender pointed out. But for me, this is still a top 10 team, and I think LSU is going to struggle to be even in the top 25. Now, traveling to Baton Rouge, hostile crowd, that's obviously something for Georgia to deal with. But I think for Georgia fans, I think it's important not to too quickly overlook Auburn once again being a formidable opponent. We have seen that Auburn does not play anywhere near as well at Jordan-Hare Stadium as it plays. When it's in its home games, when it's away from Jordan-Hare, it's not nearly as good. But this is still probably a top 10 team here in 2018, and a tough challenge for both Georgia and Alabama, despite the fact that it has to go on the road for both those games. I know a lot of Georgia fans, by the way, also are looking forward to making those travel plans. Want to be in Baton Rouge, maybe another DawgNation invasion. We'll see how that plays out. A lot of Georgia fans are certainly circling that date as a big road trip for UGA fans. We got plenty more DawgNation Daily coming up.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, really good stuff there from Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Always fun having him on DawgNation Daily. We're going to transition now to our SEC Through, and a lot of the stories we talk about here right now we'll also get into later on this afternoon. SEC Country Live, 3 p.m. Eastern Time on the SEC Country Facebook and YouTube page, whichever video page you like to check out. You'll be able to check out SEC Country Live. We'll hope you'll be there for it. And as Bill Bender was talking about when he joined us a moment ago, the Alabama quarterback situation, one of the things that sort of made that program pretty interesting to look at this spring. But things changed a bit when Tua Tagovailoa got hurt. His father, I guess, called a broken thumb. What Alabama officially is called a sprained thumb. Going back to really, though, I guess it was the first practice of the spring for Alabama. Well, he is healing and getting better. He was seen at Alabama practice yesterday, and there was some video actually of him even throwing the football. So, I'm not sure he's quite throwing it with the same zip he would if he was completely healthy. Even gripping the ball is probably a little bit difficult to do. But Tua is healthy enough now that he can be back throwing the football again. I don't think that really, for me, changes much about what my initial statement about this thing was, and I'm not making a lot of the Tua injury. If I thought it was serious, I wouldn't be saying any of this at all. Since it's not serious, since it's a minor sort of blip on the progress chart for him on his way to what I imagine is probably a pretty good 2018, taking a little bit of time off for the spring is actually probably a good thing for Alabama because they can focus in on Jalen Hurts more. They can give him some attention. And Hurts was always going to suffer by comparison with Tua Tagovailoa. You can give both guys reps, you can give both guys snaps, but as Saban has said before, you're going to know who the better of the two quarterbacks is. And at Alabama, for the people who saw practices last season, even when Tua was a player that never played before, most people would have told you he's just a better quarterback than Jalen Hurts. Well, now Hurts doesn't suffer by those comparisons anymore. He's able to lead the offense without having to look over his shoulder at Tua, at least for right now. I think it keeps him on the Alabama roster, which is Saban's number one goal for the moment. They can beat virtually all their regular season opponents, no matter which quarterback they play. So this is more about protecting your depth and sort of having one guy as an insurance policy. I believe that Hurts is that insurance policy. I think it's probably going to work out for Alabama exactly the way that Saban wants. My guess is that Hurts does stick around for the 2018 season. Not as the starter, at least not by the time the most important games of the season are going to be played, but as a guy that probably has some sort of role for Alabama because he is so lethal with his legs. We saw that video the other day of him squatting 600 pounds, and I may make fun of that a little bit because it looked like he was getting some help on both sides of the bar, but still, for any quarterback to be throwing around that kind of weight shows you what sort of physical specimen Jalen Hurts is. So he'll have some role for Alabama in some form or fashion. The Athletic had an interesting conversation with Rhett Lashley, the former Auburn offensive coordinator who left Auburn to go be OC at UConn, and the discussion came up of, well, why did you leave Auburn? And as it turns out, it's much like we thought it was, that the control, and we'll show you the specific quote later on today on SEC Country Live, but the control that Malzahn sort of wants to have over his team, over his offense, because he's the offensive-minded head coach. He was the play caller, in high school and at the college level before he became the head coach. That's a level of control that he's just not willing to relinquish, not really willing to let go. And for Rhett Lashley, he was looking to sort of grow into the next level of his career. That's why he chose to leave Auburn. It was also kind of an interesting subplot that at the end of the 2016 season, when Lashley was still there, Lashley was sort of given full control of the play calling duties, and instead of being, Malzahn finally letting things go, there was like the AL.com report that maybe this was just an attempt to, I shouldn't say report, but the AL.com suggestion from one of their columnists, that this was just sort of an intent to, maybe sort of cast blame on somebody else, scapegoat for problems if Auburn did not get better. As it turned out, Auburn did improve at the end of the 2016 season, and then Lashley decided to move on, and then Chip Lindsey was brought in. Lindsey, I believe, is a good coach, the current offensive coordinator, and yet Auburn seemed to be at its worst this past season when there was sort of remnants and maybe fingerprints of Malzahn back in control of the offense. The only thing that holds Auburn back from being a real, significant SEC contender is, can Malzahn relinquish control? Can he let somebody else call the plays, or is that power struggle going to continue? That'll be worth watching. Steve Spurrier is apparently at least considering attending the South Carolina spring game. He's going to be in the Columbia area for a charity golf tournament and thinking about maybe stopping by his old stomping grounds there in Tuscaloosa at Williams-Brice Stadium. If you're a South Carolina fan, you can't want this, right? I mean, the moment he left South Carolina, and by the way, he left that program in a ditch. The moment he left South Carolina, he became the world's biggest Florida fan again. It's like he's completely turned his back on the program that gave him a job. If you're a Carolina fan, I don't think you want any part of Spurrier at your spring game, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Also, one more quick story to get to. LSU gets a 4-star wide receiver commitment. Darren Turner is his name. LSU gets lots of wide receivers. This is nothing new. But to get him from the state of Tennessee, it's 2020 kid, by the way, but to get him from Tennessee, from the city of Memphis, another blow to Jeremy Pruitt's in-state recruiting efforts. I think Pruitt's got a lot of energy, but he's got to do better with in-state recruiting. We'll talk about that on SEC Country Live, and we'll make that your SEC through. And as we get ready to wrap up today, how about Luke Bryan a little early? I thought that was pretty funny, kind of entertaining to see the Gator hater idea make its way to American Idol. I got to tell you, I kind of enjoyed that. And the reason why we enjoy that is because here on DawgNation Daily, we believe that Georgia's number one rival is supposed to be Florida. That it matters more than any others. Auburn's a good team, but the significance of the Florida game, because it's in the East, because it's the traditional rivalry, because it's over the course of decades, one that's going to mean more. Florida has been consistently better than Auburn, despite the fact that as of late Auburn's been better than Florida. That's the rivalry game for Georgia that matters more than any other. And 213 days from right now, in Jacksonville, the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, Georgia gets ready to play Florida again. Quick programming note, no Daily Double today at the DawgNation Forum, but the Daily Double will be back soon, so check that out. We'll see you tomorrow on DawgNation Daily. All right, for those of you watching us on video, we'll look forward to getting some of your comments here on the program today. We appreciate you being with us. We'll do them on both Facebook and YouTube here. Let me see if I can get as many of these as we can today. I know we missed out on some the other day. Frank Crowder talking about the LSU game being a tough game. Yeah, I don't deny that. When you really want to think about the toughest games for Georgia, you've got Auburn and LSU in a category I think far separate from almost any other game. As Bill said when he was on the show a minute ago, we don't really know much yet about Tennessee and Florida. My assumption is that neither team is very good. I think that you've got really three games that sort of stick out as tougher than the rest. At South Carolina week 2, going to LSU sort of right there in the middle of the season, and then relatively late in the year, home game against Auburn. Those are the three games that may go a long way in determining just how close Georgia is to being back in the college football playoff. Kenneth Wiggins says, let me get Kenneth's comment here. He says, for a team to even compete with UGA, they're going to have a defense. Talking about the comment scrolled away from it. I didn't get to see the whole thing, but I think he's referring to the fact that it's going to be an upgraded offense in 2018. I think that's probably true. I think the Georgia defense is probably still fine, even replacing new names, as we sort of mentioned off the top of the show here today. But the challenge of stopping Georgia's offense, I think, gets tougher in 2018, partially because Jake Fromm is seasoned and just better. The running game, I think, doesn't skip a beat. We're going to talk some about that at a certain point this week based on what the one ESPN Ryder had gotten the quote from an opposing defensive coordinator about DeAndre Swift and how good he's going to be. I think there's plenty of reason for Georgia fans to be excited about the upcoming season's offense. Chad Mayfield talking about Fromm being a Georgia boy, not transferring. He's all dog all the time. Yeah, I don't think you have to worry right now about either of these two quarterbacks transferring. And this is no one's fault. This is just the way things are. We kind of come off an era in which most quarterback situations were predictable and sort of easy to understand, right? You've got an incumbent starter. You've got a guy waiting in the wings. You've got some young kid who oftentimes is going to be redshirted until he's sort of ready to sort of move his way up the pecking order. And at big-time major college football, that's just sort of the way things have always been. The progression there was always somewhat predictive. Well, things aren't necessarily that way anymore. Look at Alabama as an example of that. It's weird to take your starting quarterback out at halftime of a national championship game when he's done nothing but win for the last 2 years. That's what Nick Saban Alabama did. You couldn't have predicted that at the start of the season, but things just sort of worked out that way. I think with the Georgia quarterback scenario, it's also kind of the same thing. We think, well, one guy's going to win and then one guy's definitely going to transfer because that's the way that things kind of work. But we're kind of in a new era. You haven't typically had quarterbacks like this on the same team at the same time together. There's really no way to know how this is going to work out. There are completely uncontrollable, variables out there like injury or something, something else. You have to at least factor that in the conversation that there's a chance that Fromm and Fields, this all works out exactly the way it needs to, in such a way that it doesn't bother Fromm and it doesn't bother Fields, even though they're going to compete heavily with each other and they both want to be on the field. There's a chance this all works out fine. I think that, and listen, I'm a guy that talks, for a living, and I sort of, look into the future and make predictions and sort of make, opinions and statements. So I'm a hypocrite for saying this, but there is an extent to which we all just sort of need to let this play itself out and not be too quick to assume that we know who's going to win or who's going to lose or how it's all going to go. Let's just wait and see. And ultimately, it may be good for both quarterbacks. I think it's definitely going to be good for Georgia. Craig Perlago liking, I believe he's referencing a Cy Brown comment, or I should say a Cy Brown column or article at DawgNation.com. Thanks for reading the written stuff there, Greg. Appreciate that. Nick Lurch says, will I be at G-Day? I definitely will be. Looking forward to that. We'll be hopefully able to tell you about some of the things we've got going on here in the next couple of days. A lot of comments coming in quick. Randy Hall going back to the Tennessee recruiting issue, saying losing their best in-state recruits will create tension between Fulmer and Pruitt. Yeah, it could. There have been a lot of that here as of late in terms of Tennessee letting guys slip through the grip there in the volunteer state. Stacy Goebel also asking about G-Day. Hopefully we're able to tell you more about that coming up. If some of the ideas can fall into place, we're actually going to have a lot of fun there that day. Mike Mazzell says Kirby's going to play Fields quite a bit this year. I promise you that. I would expect to see Fields on the field a good bit this season too. But not at the expense of Jake Fromm, maybe. Jason Hauver on comparing Jake Fromm to Deshaun Watson. Randy Hall talking about Chris Hinton, the flip, more grass stains on those khakis. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those names that comes up with a lot of recruits a lot of the time. A lot of recruits think that Hinton is out there. You've read some of these quotes at DawgNation. A lot of recruits think Hinton is out there as a possible flip for Georgia. For those of you who don't know, this is the son of the former NFL great offensive lineman Chris Hinton Sr., a current Michigan commit at, is it GAC? Am I right about the high school on that? GAC for Hinton. And that's a guy that a lot of Georgia fans have circled. It'd be a guy you go after. Adam Speiler, and Adam, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Maybe it's Spieler. Says, BA, which group on the field improves the most this year for us? I'm going to say defensive secondary, I think. I'm going to say that is a group that really takes a step forward and improves. Statistically speaking, they're probably fine last year, but in terms of really being locked down, pass coverage guys, maybe leaving a little something to be desired. I think DeAndre Baker, who was already a good defensive back, good cornerback, year older, year better on one side. Maybe Tyson Campbell on the other side. I think that's a pretty fun secondary to think about. And, LeCount sort of emerging in a safety role, J.R. Reed proving that he's very good. He's the other safety, and then a pretty intense battle to see who occupies that star position. That could be a pretty good secondary. Joel Moody on the path for Georgia to the college football playoff, and I think I agree with most of what Joel says. When you don't have those this is one of the things that we sort of had an issue with Heather Dinich the other day about what she'd said about the Georgia schedule. This is one of those moments, though, where at least something that she said has some validity. When you don't have those big, high-profile games, you have to sort of keep that zero by your name as much as you possibly can. Now, I don't believe that Georgia has to go undefeated to make the college football playoff. We've still yet to see the SEC champion be left out of the playoff. That's a tough league to ignore. 2 teams this past year, but in terms of every game sort of mattering a little bit more when you don't have that elite schedule, that's probably true. Philip Jordan Wells talking about Justin Fields coming to Georgia. Terrence Eberhardt talking about Marc Webb. Yeah, we showed that little clip from Georgia a little earlier, what Jeff Sentell had said about it on Twitter. Marc Webb looking good and comfortable with that defensive back position. Here's the thing about Webb that I think you probably like. He's just sort of got that reputation for being tough as nails. What else could you want from a defensive back? He didn't, on that little clip we showed you earlier, he did not shy away from contact, not for a minute. So that's kind of nice to think about. Jason Holiver says, how do you see Georgia getting from 88 scholarships down to 85? I'm not as good at crunching those numbers as Seth is, and I'm not quite sure how Georgia gets there. But, Kirby Smart has said before, if I had the clip, I'd play it for you, that Kirby said on National Signing Day, we don't sweat numbers. In other words, that we may look at these situations and say, boy, how's Georgia going to sort of manage the salary cap of these scholarship limits? And behind the scenes, they've always got their plan. This is one of those deals where I have very little doubt that behind the scenes, Georgia knows all of this. It's something that Kirby Smart never stops thinking about. Sort of, scholarship issues is not something that sneaks up on him. So I wish I had a more specific answer for you, but I don't think UGA fans should be worried about Georgia on that. Pierce Ransom asks a good question. How about road trip to Missouri this year? That's a good question. If it's still Josh Heupel running that Missouri offense with a senior in Drew Lock, is it senior, right? Yeah, senior in Drew Lock. That's probably a pretty tough game. Georgia has played well at Missouri in the 3 trips it's had there before. The Sheldon Richardson Old Man Football year dominated that game, 34-0 in 2014, and then the sort of walk-off win with the Isaiah McKenzie touchdown in Eason's year of 2016. But that's 3 trips to Missouri, 3 wins for the Dogs, 2 of them in blowout fashion. That's not a stadium, in other words, that concerns me if I'm a UGA fan. But Missouri maybe being a little bit better and maybe being, I don't know if trap game's the right phrase or not. Is that something that Georgia fans ought to think about and consider a little bit? I guess I just really have my doubts that Derek Dooley, the new offensive coordinator, that's right, the same guy that was Tennessee head coach, I just have my doubts that he's going to be able to sort of build any kind of effective offense. I think that Missouri's, frankly, a little bit of a joke. Now, I hope I don't regret saying that when the season rolls around, but you've got to go play somebody on the road, and if you had to choose a team to play on the road, I think Missouri's one of the teams you'd probably choose. Let me hop over to YouTube for a minute because I really haven't done the YouTube comments here today. And I promised a lot of comments. That means a lot of comments on both sides. Over on YouTube here for a moment. Brian Kephart says, itching for college football Saturdays. Yeah, me too. Boy, I can't wait. This time of year, you really, as you said, sort of itch for it a little bit. Although I will say, I was thinking about this the other day, and maybe y'all disagree with me on this, but I love college football. I wish I could just sort of blink my eyes and the season would be here. In January, I'm already thinking about the next season. But I like the summer too. I like going to the pool. I like going to the beach. I like, so some of you like, playing golf and fishing and things like that. As I get a little older, I've got young kids. I don't want to wish the summer away either. So it's one of those things where can't wait for the season to get here, but I still enjoy the sort of warm weather time of year, even if it means, that sort of waiting game for college football to get here. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way. Anthony Wigley on YouTube says, BA, with the loss of the safety net, Javon Wims, who do you think is going to step up and be that big, tall receiver from? Loves to throw those back shoulder fades to. Well, a lot of people will tell you that maybe that guy ends up being Matt Landers, who was, sort of a scout team receiver a year ago in kind of a redshirt capacity for Georgia. But he is that big, tall guy, and that sort of back shoulder fade. Maybe Landers, one of those guys, has a chance to sort of step up and catch that ball a bit this year. If it's somebody of maybe a more expected variety, I wonder if J.J. Holloman works his way into that role this season. I think that Holloman's athleticism, we talked a couple times about Marc Webb finding a way, not Marc Webb, Trey Blunt finding a way onto the field a bit more because he's a physical wide receiver. But Holloman's got that sort of natural athleticism. He showed it at G-Day last year. Had some great, very, very good-looking catches. So, I would say if you're looking for that new Javon Wims, maybe it's a Holloman, maybe it's a Matt Landers, but Wims is tough shoes to fill. No question about that. Let me get a couple more on YouTube, and then we'll go back to Facebook. I talked about defensive backs earlier. Brian Kepler on YouTube says, our defensive backs going to be really polished going against the incoming number 1 and number 2 wide receivers in practice every day and vice versa. It's the best thing about Georgia. Those tough practices that Georgia's able to have, good on good, best on best, ones on ones, makes everybody better. And you're right. I think that a lot of folks benefit from that. A lot of position groups benefit from that. Dapper Dan says, this is the season where I'm going to be extremely optimistic about the secondary. Wilson's going to be back. 2019 kids coming in too. Guys like Bishop, Poole, Smith be ready to contribute, and D'Angelo Gibbs. Yeah, I'd expect D'Angelo Gibbs to be a contender for some playing time there. I mentioned LeCount earlier. And as you said, that's a huge crop of 2017 defensive back recruits. And, from that group, surely someone's likely to emerge as well who's, not necessarily top of mind always when we have these kind of discussions. Vernon Luzier back on Facebook here says, Monty Rice, keep an eye on that young man. He's going to bring into the linebacker position. I think he's going to be on the field a lot. I really do. He's a good physical run-stopping linebacker. You still got to have those guys. There's so much two linebacker sets in college football now. Even the SEC, the nickel has essentially become a base defense, and Georgia's been lucky where it could play with Lorenzo Carter, who was almost like sort of a hybrid defensive back linebacker at times. But, you still got to have those linebackers that can stop the run. And Monty Rice, to me, is one of those guys. So, yeah, I'm really high on Rice. Really. I was high on him last year, and I feel like for the most part, that prediction turned out to be true. Jason Halver says, what do you think about Georgia Tech's Paul Johnson basically blaming Georgia Tech's budget for his poor results? I haven't seen that quote. If it's a new one, I've seen those kind of quotes from Johnson in the past. I find all that to be unsavory and distasteful because Johnson kind of wants to have it both ways. If you want to be at more of a football factory, then by all means, set yourself up to go there. I mean, set yourself up to go to a place that's going to spend more on football. But Georgia Tech sort of is what it is. It's a program that doesn't have a large fan base, doesn't have a large donor base. They don't have the ability to sort of generate the kind of revenue that that he would say is required for a winning there. It's one of the reasons why I'm wondering if Georgia and Georgia Tech should even be playing each other anymore. I mean, Johnson poor mouths his resources and his financial wherewithal, every chance that he gets. But if Tech had more money, they'd probably use that money to buy him out and go out and find another coach because he doesn't recruit worth a lick. I mean, Johnson gets no players to Tech. So if Tech started spending more money, the first thing they would do is probably buy him out. So, I mean, he sort of wants to have it both ways on that. Look, he's a smart coach. There's no doubt about that. He's running a style that's really tough to play. And at Georgia Tech, that may be the best overall choice you could possibly make. But he is, at times, to me, passive-aggressive. And that's an example of the sort of passive-aggressive behavior that I have a hard time tolerating. Scott Shackelford says, do you think Georgia finishes number 1 in recruiting again for 2019? This is on Facebook. I do. I think that Georgia's going to have the number 1 class again, and if not number 1, no lower than top 3. And if you're in, the top 3, unless you're sort of getting fewer elite players in Alabama, you're in plenty good enough shape. A lot of people who sort of crunch those numbers, on the 24/7 sports side, that sort of 300+ score that a lot of people pay close attention to. Anything sort of 300+ seems to be just about fine. So my guess is that Georgia is in good shape to get the number 1 class again. Cody Bean says Derek Dooley's a perfect fit for Missouri. I think that's kind of a funny thing to say. R.J. Raines mentioning Riley Ridley as being a big-time player for Georgia receiver this season. I am excited about Ridley. I think that's a name to pay attention to. Chris Walker says, I hate having South Carolina for the second game of the season. Too dang many suspensions that early in the season. They need to move that game back. I don't think I have to worry about the suspensions as much this year, unless there's somebody that I'm not thinking about or not paying attention to. And I know that there's this thought out there that suspensions and Steve Spurrier's jab at Georgia aside, that the game's a little easier for South Carolina earlier in the year compared to later in the year. Maybe, injuries haven't taken its toll, depth. Georgia would be stronger in November than South Carolina would be. I don't really know what all the thought process is on that. But I have to say, and I hope I'm not, alienating myself from Georgia fans by saying this, I kind of enjoyed the tradition of early in the year, find out how good you are, go to a great stadium like Williams-Brice. I think that's an intense atmosphere for college football. Host an SEC game that early in the year in Athens. I kind of like playing South Carolina in September. I like having the early game to care about and think about. I never really loved playing that game late in the season when that's when it was played. I don't necessarily believe there's that big of a difference when you play these teams, although I can understand the argument for, as I said, a sort of a depth attrition later on in the year. But you've got to play somebody, as I said a moment ago. So I sort of enjoy and I know the folks in Augusta love that border bash stuff. I sort of enjoy the tradition of playing South Carolina early in the season. I could be parting company with a lot of Georgia fans by saying that, but I kind of do. Trey Blakely asking about Walter Grant. I think that Grant could have a really good year. I think that's going to be one to watch as well. In fact, I think that Grant is one of my sort of second-year players in the program. He's one of the guys I'm paying the most attention to for this upcoming season. Go back and watch that Notre Dame game again. Grant was everywhere that night. He showed the flashes then of what he has a chance to be in 2018. All right, I always love the comments. It's my favorite part of the day. I wish I could just sort of sit here and take comments all day long, but alas, there is more to be done. So let me get ready to say goodbye for right now, both on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks for watching the show. We'll see you 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon for SEC Country Live. We will have the podcast up and running at the world-famous DawgNation.com and all the various podcast outlets here in just a little bit. No Daily Double today. We'll get back to that soon. And we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. for another episode of Dog Nation Daily Live. Warm weather in Georgia today. Hope it's warm where you are. We'll talk to you tomorrow.